Welcome to this edition of The Bigger Game, from surviving to thriving. Our guest today is Richard Kramer, board member from Cares at Farmington Hills, food pantry that serves what, 5 or 6 communities in the area, Richard?
Actually, 8 communities in Wayne and Oakland County, Michigan.
Do you know what they are offhand? Can you speak to those?
Well, they're all the cities that touch either Farmington or Farmington Hills. So you'll have Southfield, Livonia, West Bloomfield, Farmington Hills, Redford, and one or two other communities. It's a complete circle. Everybody who's within driving distance of Farmington and Farmington Hills in Southeast Michigan.
So you would think, Farmington Hills, you would think West Bloomfield, some of these other communities, that food insecurity would not be a thing.
Yeah, there is a stereotype that the need is only in the core urban community, especially that we're just a stone's throw from the city of Detroit. The problem is in the law of averages. If I told you to walk across a river, which is on average 3 feet deep and would come up to your chest, you would probably walk across that river. But at some spot in the river could be 25 feet deep and you would drown. It just in the rest of the river it would be shallow. What you don't see in the suburbs is you have a very high average income, enviable even throughout the United States, but within that community, there may be people who are handicapped, there may be people who are retired and have health issues, there may be single parents raising children and grandchildren. There's all kinds of people with developmental disabilities, people who don't even know how to fill out a form in retirement to collect Social Security. And all of this adds up to food insecurity. And food insecurity is often the tip of a larger iceberg for all kinds of problems with housing, with food, with healthcare, and other life issues. So you could be in the wealthiest community, but maybe 20% of the people in that city are working in domestic services for the wealthy homeowners, and they're just as needy as people in the inner city of Detroit or any other city.
Yeah, I'm glad you bring light to that and can speak to that with such clarity, because but many times they're the forgotten people, right? Like our seniors, this is another population that many times just gets overlooked.
Yeah,
So
we forget about a senior where the caregiver is worn out caring for a husband, let's say, who's bedbound with a serious post-stroke condition, and she might be able to go out and hold down a job, but she's taking care of her husband, and they don't have extra money to pay for help in the household, and so they're doing it all themselves. Sometimes the caregivers even predeceased the sick spouse.
yeah, I'm glad you're here to speak about that. The bigger game, right? So the bigger game for me is, you know, uh, not taking the short win, but taking the long-term win. If not letting my ego get the better of me in a situation, but actually choosing love, care, some other higher frequency in the moment when I really don't want to, and then appreciating the results at the end, right? Much down the road potentially, um, but not succumbing to the short-term win and then taking the long-term loss, right? What does it mean to you, Richard?
Well, I've spent more than a half a century working in the field of philanthropy in hospitals, in community organizations, in medical schools, in universities, in addiction treatment centers, in all kinds of settings. And what it means to me is kind of trying to leave the planet a couple of inches better off than you found it when you were born. And these are not quick fixes. The problems in the world are huge. And if each one of us can do a few things within our skill set and reach out to a few other people and get them involved, we can find solutions, and we can feed people, and we can heal people, and we can educate people. And this is what interests me.
That's excellent. Tell me about inside of that, the bigger game. Maybe there's a life nugget or two that you want to share with us and make us richer for it.
Well, if I can just tell a little tiny bit of my own story and how I stumbled into you in the community, and how one meeting in a community setting, in a room full of 50 other people, and a casual conversation that wasn't more than a 2-minute chat led to a casual friendship, and then into a transformational type of conversation that remove obstacles. Abizer, I ran into you in Oakland County, I want to say maybe 7, 8 years ago or more, and we were just meeting and greeting in a kind of a chamber of commerce type of setting. I was then doing fundraising at an addiction treatment hospital in Brighton, Michigan, and I think you were in those years working in your family's computer business. That's how long ago it was, and we just struck up a conversation, and at some point we fell into the habit of having coffee with one another every 4 or 5 months or so. And there came a time about 2.5 years ago when I had to drive my wife to a doctor's appointment, and I knew that the doctor was not even half a mile from your office. And I said to my wife, I'm going to give a friend a call, so I'm not just sitting in the parking lot. Maybe he'll have a minute to have a cup of coffee with me while you're in your checkup. And so I called you. You made yourself available, and you asked me of a few open-ended questions. And one of the questions that you asked was, "What are you doing with your life? And what do you want to do with your life?" And I said, well, this was just post-COVID. And I said that, I had retired from full-time fundraising and had been involved with a couple of charities as a volunteer, helping them raise money. And during COVID, there was one charity, an educational charity, that had such impacts to its income stream that it was at risk of having to lay off a number of employees. And so I said, if you're willing to let me in as a volunteer, and this was an international charity, we met only over Zoom, and there were people from 3 or 4 continents who were in on these phone calls. And I said, I have some ideas that have been successful in other settings. Maybe I can help you. And so I assessed their situation and said, I think if we created some new leadership groups, we could interest people in getting more active and raising some new money. And within a matter of less than a year, we had raised approximately $600,000 of new money for that charity. They didn't have layoffs, and they still continue to do well now. Their involvement with me ended soon after that. They hired some outside professional counsel, and so I was casting about for some new things to get involved with. I became involved with another educational and cultural organization here locally, and I felt like I didn't fit in. I just wasn't able to make the kind of contributions that I felt I should make. And then you and I had coffee, and I described my situation as a person who wanted to make a difference in the world and had some success in doing that and some frustrations in doing that. And I said, do you have any ideas, Abizer? And you said, let me make a phone call. Why don't you take it from there?
Well, I think your journey is your journey. I think you ended up volunteering at CARES from there, and then, I think a lot of it came down to shutting the door, right, and have it yourself. You want to
Yes.
speak to that, perhaps?
So if I take the mic back, Abizer, in a space of about 5 minutes, um, opened up his address book on his phone, called the executive director at a charity here in Farmington Hills that serves Wayne and Oakland County communities where there's food insecurity. Maybe 2 days later, I was in the executive director, Todd Lippa's office, talking about myself. I brought in a copy of my resume and my biographical sketch. And I said, Abizer said, this is a wonderful place and you're a great guy. And it's a fabulous mission because we have a huge number of food insecure families amidst the wealth in the suburbs. And at that point, I was here between 2 and 4 days a week for the rest of my life until now. And in fact, if you look at the screen, I'm not at home. I'm sitting in the office at CARES in Farmington Hills.
Yeah. And so I think the nugget here is that you had pretty much shut the door on yourself on opportunities and figured, you made the difference for the educational charity. This next one didn't work out. I mean, it seemed like you had a sense that you were done, right? It was just now riding up into the sunset potentially.
Yeah, I think at the point that you and I were sipping on a cup of coffee, I was referring to my career in the past tense. And you're not afraid to call people on their illusions and their nonsense, and you kind of kicked my butt and said, past tense, you're very much alive and breathing, Richard. Look at all the good you can do in the world in the present tense and in the future tense. And so you helped me see the myopia of the situation. You got me out of my frustration immediately and into the field of action. And in the field of action, I've there's nothing I enjoy more than coming into CARES and also working from home on fundraising projects, on gifts and grants and campaigns and all kinds of fundraising activities.
Yeah,
And
so I
it's
want to
been wonderful.
acknowledge you for the courage that took, right? I mean, how often do I shut the doors on myself? I say no before the world says no, or before the other person or the situation says no, and then act like that's real, right? And the courage it took for you to open that door again and step back out and make this difference. I mean, I wonder if you had, I mean, I'm sure God would have provided somebody else to make a difference for those people. However, you got that opportunity to make that difference for all these people that cares. Maybe you can speak a little about cares a little bit, and kind of the difference, you and your team have made there as, and now that you've joined the team for the last, what, 2.5 years now, kind of where it was and where it is today as a result of your participation and the overall team's contribution to society.
All right. Well, I mean, realistically, my contribution is small, but if you count it in terms of how many months of food are going to families, CARES has responded to a huge growth in food insecurity. Right now, if you can't turn on the TV or pick up a newspaper in any city in America and not see all the imminent threats that are potentially coming as a result of potential government cuts to the food stamp program and to Medicaid and all these other programs that afflict those who have lower income status and rely on government programs. CARES, even prior to government cuts, if you look at the number of households CARES was serving with food on a monthly basis, just 2 years ago, that was a little over 400 households a month. Currently, it's over 800 households a month. And what that means is that's children that's entire families, that's single parent families, that's elderly disabled people, that's people with developmental problems who can't even fill out a form. And CARES has a team, they call it a navigation team. It's basically a social work team that says, okay, maybe CARES can meet their needs for a food on a monthly basis, but let's say their other needs extend into needs for other government programs or other community organizations offerings. CARES actually helps network people in the community. My office right here is upstairs from where there are every kind of well-attended 12-step meetings. So somebody might be food insecure because they've lost their job because they have an addiction or alcoholism problem. There's every kind of need, every kind of crisis due to illness, due to loss of job, every kind of life circumstance can take a family. Many of our clients were husband and wife had two jobs between them. Some of them had 3 and 4 jobs. They were working full-time and part-time, and still in their later years needed help because
So
food
think about that for a second. So if
inflation
you had taken, if you
tremendous.
had taken the choice to ride off into the sunset, and I mean, you poo-poo your contributions there a little bit. I get that. I think it's part of your humility. Um, and perhaps somebody else would have stepped in and done this, and God would have given somebody else the opportunity. However, He gave you the opportunity, and you had the courage to step into it. And as a result, all these people that you just talked about, right? You're able to make that contribution to them, and you're blessed to be able to play a small part in this overall picture for 800 families now, right? I mean, it's huge. How do people reach out to CARES if they want to, participate somehow or do that? Is there a quick way for them to make a financial contribution or maybe volunteer? How do they do that?
All right. If they're lucky enough to have access to a computer or a smartphone or can get to the library to use the computer, the CARES website is CARES, CARESFH for FarmingtonHills.org, CARESFH.org. CARES in Farmington Hills can be Googled from any computer. Um, just call their number, come in for an appointment. They will assess your need and they will work to meet your need.